He had one heel of bread and a match left in the world. Then a girl stepped from the tall grass and shivered. Snow hadn't come yet, but the earth already sounded hollow. Wind moved through last year's weeds and made them rattle like dry bones in a tin. The boy, 13, jacket too small, and boots 2 sizes short of mercy, walked the fence that wasn't a fence anymore, just gray posts and 2 strands of wire singing in the cold. Folks in town called him Asa Finch when they remembered he existed. Most days nobody did. The house on his claim held 2 rooms and a stove that needed coaxing. The well rope burned his hands where the hemp had frayed. There was a heel of bread on the shelf, a cracked cup, and the memory of a mother who had taught him to slice thin and chew slow. He had learned the thin part. The slow came easy when there wasn't much to swallow. He was carrying an armload of willow sticks when the grass parted down by the creek. She stepped out, the age where the face is still narrow but the eyes have seen too many miles. Hair in 2 braids, one half unraveled. Buckskin torn at the knee. Skin wind-chapped, not dirty. Her breath came short, the sound people make after running to a door they are not sure is safe to knock upon. She looked past Asa first, over his shoulder, behind him, counting exits the way a body learns when it has had to choose. Only then did her gaze settle on him. There was no begging in it. There was also no threat, just the plain fact of being lost. He lifted a hand without stepping closer. Not a wave, not a command. A shape in the air that meant, I see you, and I am not a trap. She watched his fingers, then the willow sticks, then the house. Her mouth worked, trying to catch words in a language that was either his or not his. None came. She showed him her hands instead, palms out. On the left, a scratch that had clotted dark. On the right, a twine bracelet worked snug around the wrist with a bead the color of creek water. He nodded toward the porch and set the sticks by the door. The stove took 3 tries and most of his last match before it remembered how to draw. He cut the heel of bread straight down the middle. 2 pieces came away, each an apology for the size of the other. He pushed one across the table. She didn't reach for it immediately. She pressed 2 fingertips to the wood, as if testing whether the table meant harm. Then she took the bread in both hands and ate without noise that would have sounded like wanting. When she was done, she set the last bite aside. He pretended not to see her saving it. Steam from the kettle fogged the little window. Asa poured water that was more hot than tea. She wrapped both palms around the tin cup and held it like it could teach warmth to stay. After the first sip, a word finally found her mouth. Thanks, she said, soft and careful, like something borrowed that might need to be returned. Then another, a name given low. Sani. He tried her name and got it almost right. She smiled at the try, quick and small. He pointed to his chest and gave his own. That seemed to clarify things between them. She nodded and looked at the door as if considering what debt she had made and how to pay it. He shook his head. His hand moved in a little arc that meant not now. Outside, a crow called twice, and the wind said more about weather than men. Sani glanced at the rafters, at the clay chinking, at the places the roof breathed light where it shouldn't. Her eyes came back to the stove. She rose, not asking, found the bucket, and went for water. He started to stop her, then didn't. Some kindnesses become stronger when you let them choose their own weight. They worked without talking. She scrubbed the kettle and his one plate with clean snow until the tins shone like river pebbles. He split kindling. She mended his frayed well rope with a neat splice he hadn't known existed. He pretended not to be impressed and failed. When dusk came, it came all at once. The prairie does that, decides it has been day long enough and drops blue over everything. He pulled the blanket off his bed and folded it in half, then half again, until it looked like an offer instead of a surrender. He put it on the floor near the stove and stepped back. She shook her head, pressed the blanket back into his hands, and gave him the tiniest push toward the bed with the back of her wrist. Her face said, "You live here. I am passing through." He spread the blanket where she had placed it the first time. Before sleep, she reached into a small pouch he had not seen and drew a pinch of something brittle and green. She dropped it into the kettle, and the room took on a scent that reminded him of wet stone and a good place to hide. She handed him the last bite of the bread, hers, and did not watch to see what he did with it. He put it in his mouth because sometimes the right way to say, "I understand," is to accept the part you wanted to refuse. He woke once to the sound of the door unhooking. It wasn't fear that shook him. It was loss coming too fast. He went to the threshold and saw her in the yard, face turned to the north as if listening to something only she could hear. She raised a hand in the same shape he had used for "I am not a trap." The gesture looked better on her. Then she slipped into the tall grass, and the grass swallowed its own trail. Sleep left after that. He lay on top of the quilt and watched the orange stove eye fade. He could hear the wind change, the difference between a cold that wanders and a cold that has decided where it wants to sit. He thought about the bead on her wrist and the twine she had woven. He wondered if anyone would come looking for her, and whether that would be good news or not. Near dawn, the ground began to speak in a way the ground rarely does, unless it carries weight. At first, Asa thought it was wind stacking itself into a bigger sound. Then the board under his palm trembled very slightly where the bed leg pressed it. Not thunder, not a cattle run. Hoof beats, far yet many, moving at a walk that wasn't worried. A walk that owned its time. He rose and pulled on his boots without laces. The room looked like a person might live in it. Kettle polished, kindling stacked, rope mended. He opened the door. The horizon was still iron. He saw nothing but the smudge of creek cottonwoods and the first ghost of morning in the east. The sound thickened and drew nearer. It came from three sides and then from all sides, as if the earth had learned to circle. Asa stood in the yard with the last of the cold in his lungs and did not run because there was nowhere to go that would not be smaller than what was coming. He wiped his palms on his coat and told whatever was about to appear that he had a stove that worked and a table that could hold weight. He hoped those would be the right kinds of answers. When the light finally found them, it found a line of riders cresting the far rise. Shapes still dark, feathers lifting, ponies stepping with the calm of animals not required to prove anything. 50, maybe more. They did not hurry, they did not shout. They came down the slope like weather the prairie had been saving for a long time. They came down the ridge without hurry, ponies stepping neat, feathers quiet in the still air. Sun climbed, cleared its throat, and turned the line into faces and braid and rawhide. 50 riders, maybe a few more, settling the yard the way a flock knows which branch will hold. They fanned into a circle without a word. Not siege, not parade. A ring set at a respectful distance from the door. Each horse stopped nose to tail, every pair of eyes looking outward toward the grass, not inward toward the boy. 2 riders slid to the creek bank and posted themselves where cottonwoods met the cut. Another pair climbed the roofline with their gaze and stayed there, reading sky. Asa did not raise his hands. He let them hang open at his sides. He stepped off the porch and stood where the yard gave him room to be seen without pretending to lead anything. The stove breathed behind him, the kettle lid ticking as it cooled, a small sound that insisted a house existed here. A man with silver at his temples and a coat of well-mended buckskin rode forward until his pony's shadow touched Asa's boots. He didn't speak first. He looked. He measured the fence lean, the patched roof, the mended well rope, the blanket folded on the chair just inside the door. Then he reached into a pouch and brought out a bead the color of creek water tied to a loop of twine. He held it where Asa could see and nodded once, the nod a hinge that swung both directions. Asa recognized the twin to Sani's bracelet, but did not step closer. The man tied the loop to Asa's gatepost with neat thumbs. The twine looked small against the gray wood, and still somehow made the yard feel less alone. The riders moved in unison without being told. One led 3 ponies to the trough and tipped a water skin over their noses before they drank, as if teaching them patience. 2 slid from saddles and laid a haunch of deer on the stoop, wrapped in clean hide. A woman riding with the rear rank, hair streaked with white, moccasins dusted to the ankle, crossed to the well and worked the bucket, testing the splice with the same kind of pressure that finds truth in boards. Her mouth softened when the rope held. Asa fetched his only knife and began cutting the deer into pieces that would fit the stove mouth. The silver-templed man watched how he set the blade, how he kept the blood from the threshold. He seemed to approve of the way a boy remembered to keep a house clean while a world watched. Sani returned as quietly as she left. One moment she wasn't there, and the next she was beside the woman with white in her hair, hand on the older sleeve like a thought finishing. Her braids were tight again. Her face was not as hollow. She carried Asa's tin cup, polished with snow until the lip shone bright. She set it on the table just inside the door and straightened it so the handle faced the way his right hand would find it without looking. Then she stepped back to the circle's shadow and stood inside it, the way a person stands at the line where stream becomes river. Asa wanted to say something proper and strong. The words he had were small. He went with the ones that fit. She was cold, he said to the air that held all the riders. The older woman met his eyes long enough to make a sentence without moving her mouth. She turned her palm up for a moment, showing a scar that matched the line on Sani's left hand. Then she closed it around nothing and made a small motion that meant more than thanks. The circle breathed. They did not enter his house. They did not leave. They became day around it. Two boys not much older than Asa took turns walking the fence line, straightening a sag with a length of willow, weight in the right place rather than brute force. A pair of girls came to the porch with a pot on a crossbar and a bundle of wild onion. They set both on the step and left before his surprise could turn awkward. The woman at the well shaped a coil of grass and slid it between bucket and iron hook so the rope would stop wearing itself down. The silver-templed man rode the perimeter twice and then sat where shade and view agreed. No one asked for his story. No one fed him questions with the shine of charity. They arranged themselves so that predators thinking about lamb might pick a different horizon, and that was the story they wanted told. At midday, Asa cooked what he knew how to cook. He salted meat with a pinch this side of sting, cut onions so thin it almost apologized, and gave back hot slices on his plate, one at a time, to whoever came near enough to be offered without him leaving the doorway. A palm would appear, rough or small or ringed by ash, take a piece with a nod, and fade. When Sani's palm came, he tilted the plate and let the biggest slice slide. Her mouth twitched. She turned to the older woman and split it clean, halves even. Silence worked like language until early afternoon carried something else in it. 3 riders came down fast from the north, not part of the circle. Dust in their wake, long rifles across their bows, eyes narrow with the kind of hunger that calls itself necessary. Wolfers or men who wore that smell because it scared softer things. They saw the ring, weighed it, and kept coming until 20 paces made nonsense of their courage. The silver-templed man did not raise his voice. He lifted 2 fingers, and the entire line facing north leaned in the saddle the same fraction. The air changed shape. The 3 slowed, pretended their ponies needed breath, pretended they had intended to veer east the whole time, and did, keeping their faces brave until the grass hid them. Nobody cheered. The circle went back to watching the world. Late in the day, clouds stacked like folded blankets over the far butte. Eagles wrote their names on the hot air. Shadows lengthened, and the circle eased toward the draw, where horses could crop without losing lines of sight. The silver-templed man rode back to the gate, touched the twine bead once, then drew a small line of ash across the post below it, a mark the rain would take in a week. His mouth opened and closed on a syllable Asa guessed was a name. The older woman said 2 words Sani repeated softly. The boy heard only the shape of them, not their meaning, but he knew a blessing when the hair on his arms answered it. Sani stepped forward the width of a hand. From her pouch, she pulled out something wrapped in doeskin and placed it on the table beside the tin cup. Then she drew a circle in the dust with the toe of her moccasin, not around him, but around the door, a ring as thin as a whisper. She touched the circle once and left it to mean what it meant. When they rode away, they did it the way they had come, quiet and sure, grass unbent where hooves had been. The beat on the gate moved a little in the breeze, and then remembered to be still. Asa stood by the threshold with the weight of not alone sitting calmly on his shoulders. He unwrapped the doeskin. Inside lay a small cake of blue clay, mixed with something sweet and a strip of dried meat tied with a knot he could not have made on his best day. He set the meat by the stove and pinched a bit of clay into the kettle as Sani had done with the green. The room took on a new scent, clean rain over stone that had not seen light in years. He ate when it was time and not before. He swept the floor because it felt right to answer a circle with a circle. He touched the twine bead on the gate like a person says amen without speaking. When the first star showed in the window, he lay down and could hear nothing at all but the honest noises a house makes when it is useful. Somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, 50 riders set camp where the creek bent and the wind agreed not to brag. He did not fear sleep. He let it take him, knowing the earth might speak again by hooves or not at all, and that either way the morning would find him with a cup set where his hand could reach it without looking. Morning came soft, the kind that lets roofs thaw by listening first. Smoke lifted in two steady threads from the cottonwoods by the creek where the riders had camped. Asa set the kettle, swept the floor, and ran a hand along the new grass gasket the old woman had woven for his bucket. The rope purred instead of groaning. The bead on the gate held a drop of dew and made it look like the post had learned to keep a small light. The circle did not return at once. It stayed within sight and earshot, horses grazing, sentries posted where the land could whisper ahead of trouble. Asa checked his traps, found them empty, and felt grateful. Meat enough sat wrapped by the stove. He tried the well one more time just to hear the sound of something rising. It came up clear and cold, wearing the smell of stone. By mid-morning, the town remembered there was a boy alone out on the flats with a ring of riders around him. Dust lifted on the county road, a buggy first, then 3 men on sorrels. Deputy Hale drove, jaw tight, behind a ranch foreman and a tinner whose hat held more shine than sense. They stopped at the far fence and took a long look, mouths pinched as if the yard owed them answers. Asa stepped to the gate and did not unhook it. The deputy raised a hand halfway, a greeting that was also a warning to the others not to dig their heels in. "You all right, Finch?" he asked without too much rough in it. Asa nodded. He said, "A girl was cold," because that was most of the truth he had, and it fit in one breath. The ranch foreman pushed his brim back. "War party," he said to the deputy's shoulder, voice hard with the kind of fear that looks for nails. The tinner spat near the wheel. "If they mean peace, they can move along." The circle did not close. It did not show its teeth. It breathed. 2 riders edged a little closer to shade the boy from words that burned worse than sun. The man with silver at his temples rode down the slope at a walk. He stopped with his pony's shadow almost touching the deputy's boot. He did not look at the foreman or the tinner. He looked at Hale like men who have carried a lot of miles look at other men who carry law. Hale kept both hands where the world could see them. "We're checking on a child," he said, not raising his voice. "No trouble if no trouble." The silver-templed man inclined his head once, the way a door moves when a hinge is oiled. He reached and tapped 2 fingers against the twine bead on the post, then the ash line below it, now faint. He said a word that sounded like kept. The old woman came to the well and set the bucket down so it didn't slap the stone. Sonny stepped into the space between Asa and the buggy and folded her hands, not hiding the small scar on the left. The deputy's eyes flicked to it. He breathed out slow. "All right," he said. "We see it." He backed the buggy 1 turn of the wheel and tipped his hat to the boy. "If you need a thing, you send a flag on your roof." He did not tell the circle what to do. He did not have to. He turned the team, taking the foreman's glare, and the tinner's spit with him like bad weather dug loose. The yard exhaled only when dust settled. Work followed because it knew where to go. 2 girls came with willow switches and showed Asa how to lace them through the gaps in his door to stop the winter from speaking inside come January. A thin boy with eyes like coyote dusk fixed the hinge on Asa's 1 chair with a wedge made from bone. The woman with white in her hair walked the line where wall met floor and stuffed clean grass in places a mouse might imagine itself brave. Sonny took Asa's shirt to the stoop, turned it wrong side out, and stitched the underarm so the wind would not learn to live there. Every act was small, each filled a hollow. Near noon, the 3 riders from yesterday's north edge came back, this time with 2 more, and the wrong kind of laughter. They stopped farther off and called something Asa could not catch. The silver-templed man didn't answer. He lifted his hand a span and pointed once to the creek bank. 5 young men eased their ponies forward, not fast, not slow, and took positions on the rise that made the sun a blade behind them. The laughter fell and did not get up. The 5 waited without moving until the mischief riders turned their horses and let the day keep them. It happened without a shout or a show. Asa felt his chest loosen where it had learned to clamp for noises. The kettle sang again. Sonny dropped a pinch of blue clay into it and set a clean cup by the door. The old woman sliced strips of meat thin as dry grass and laid them on a rack over embers until the smell walked out into the yard and made even the horses breathe deeper. The silver-templed man took a step toward the threshold as if to refuse meat from a child, then accepted 1 strip because refusing would have been the heavier thing to lift. Afternoon brought a different kind of attention. A group from town climbed the rise on foot. Storekeeper's wife, two boys with a length of rope, a teacher with chalk dust on her cuffs. Curiosity, not courage. They kept to the fence. They saw the bead. They saw the ash line. They saw the deer haunch and the way the circle watched outward. Their faces tried on three expressions: fear, hunger, shame, before they settled on a fourth: understanding that did not advertise itself. The teacher raised two fingers and then put her hand to her heart. The silver-templed man returned the shape, and the crowd left smaller than it had come. As the sun went soft, the riders drew in a little, tightening the ring the width of a hand. The old woman took Asa's shovel, went to the yard's far corner, and pressed the blade into earth twice. Not deep, just enough to ask the ground to remember where kindness had happened. She sprinkled a line of clean sand across the cut, then smoothed it with her palm. Sani watched her and did the same near the porch step, marking a place where feet would land first on cold mornings. Asa did not know why those lines mattered, only that the room felt more like a room because they were there. Evening is when stories usually look for mouths. None came. Sani sat on the stoop and twined a thin cord from grass, while the old woman hummed a tune with so little sound in it you had to choose to hear. Asa sharpened his knife in small strokes and found his breathing kept time with the stone. At last, the silver-templed man walked his pony to the gate. He untied the bead and looped it again, higher, the knot changed by one turn so a rein would not draw it tighter. He touched the post where dew had been that morning and left his hand there a moment as if he were checking the board for rot. He looked at Asa and at the door and then past both, to the part of the yard where nothing stood yet. He made a small motion with his chin that meant put something here. Asa saw it without knowing the shape. A stack of wood, a chicken pen, a bench where winter shirts could remember sun. Sani stood and put the cord she had twisted into Asa's palm. It was long enough to circle a wrist twice. She did not tie it. She closed his fingers over it and stepped back. The old woman took up the cup from the table and turned it so the handle faced the door again. She smiled, which looked on her face not like happiness, but like approval that hadn't needed to try very hard. They left before the first star, slow as they had come, the circle thinning where the land allowed and thickening where a coyote trail cut too close. At the creek, hooves sank with the sound of patience. Beyond the cottonwoods, the smoke thinned and took the day with it. Night settled. Asa banked the fire and walked to the yard corner the old woman had marked. He pressed his heel into the damp dirt where the shovel had cut and felt the ground give the right amount. He went back to the porch and sat with his back against the jamb. The bead did not flash. It held its color the way a pond keeps sky after wind leaves. He turned the grass cord in his hands and smelled the faint clean of the blue clay the kettle had learned. He did not sleep at once. He watched the doorway, then the strip of dust Sani had drawn yesterday, now a little blurred by feet that had honored it anyway. He listened and heard nothing with teeth in it. He let the house make its honest noises and tried the sound of his name under his breath to see if it felt the same now that the earth had spoken in hooves around it. It didn't. It felt like something a valley might remember. By late afternoon, the wind turned thin and mean, the kind that licks leaf edges to see what will catch. Heat had no right to be there, and was there anyway. The riders shifted their line a little uphill, reading the sky the way old hands read a horse's ear. The silver-templed man watched the cut north of the cottonwoods as if it were a mouth that sometimes lied. Asa stacked a shoulder-high wall of green willow near the pump, dunked burlap in the trough, and laid it across the porch rail. Sani threaded a fresh cord through his gate latch and tied it quick. The knot looked simple until you tried it. The old woman slid 2 buckets beneath the eaves, where drip would find them if the roof decided to remember rain. At sundown, a stain lifted at the far rim. Smoke walking low. Not cook fire, not camp. A smear that unrolled along the draw where dry grass runs like fuse. The first lick of flame showed itself shy, and then did not bother with that posture again. It ran. The 3 trouble riders from the north showed briefly on the ridge, then thought better of being seen near their handiwork. The circle did not look up to shame them. It moved. 5 men galloped to the fire's shoulder and put their mounts belly to smoke. Blankets soaked, faces wrapped. Two women tore a strip of ground bare with rakes cut from saplings, throwing dirt in a steady breath. The old woman handed Asa a wet sack and pointed to the fence corner where grass tufted thick. He slapped and dragged until water and burlap together made a dark crescent the flame could not chew. Sani stayed at the well, working the rope hand over hand, arms a metronome that never missed. She jammed a wedge of willow between hook and bucket so the splice took no strain and let the wheel spin quicker. Her breath came fast but even. When her hands stung, she dipped them, shook once and gripped again. Smoke pushed low. Sparks went shopping for new purchase. The silver-templed man raised his palm to shoulder height, then dropped it to his thigh. Signal, not shout. 3 riders lit a narrow backfire at the line the women had scraped. A ribbon of flame traveling against the big one. Careless as a goat. Ugly, necessary. Heat folded. Wind took a step the other way. The roar lost its brag. Deputy Hale appeared on the town road with 2 men in a wet tarp, faces the color of old pewter. He saw what the circle had done and did not order it different. He and his pair shouldered in where the dirt line faltered and threw their blankets the way farmers throw seed when they have one calm day to get it right. A minute stretched long enough to break. It didn't. The big flame hit the black and found nothing polite to eat. It leaned, searched, hissed hard at the insult, and took the path the backfire told it to take. Away, across the draw, into a notch where rock remembered its job. Smoke thinned. Heat stepped down 3 rungs. Embers drifted and fell without stories to tell. When it was over, no one cheered. Hands hung for a moment in the air, as if they had forgotten they belonged to wrists. Then the old woman laughed. One short bark, and that sounded like a plank set right. She pressed a damp rag into Sani's fingers. Sani wiped ash from her cheeks in 2 slow strokes and blew her breath once like a little train that knew it had made it. Hale walked to the gate, took in the circle, the blackened crescent, the unburned yard. He looked at the faint ash line on the post and the bead loop just above it. He tipped his hat to the silver-templed man, not quite to the brim, and said, "Good work," the way a man thanks the river for choosing not to climb his stairs. The silver-templed man touched 2 fingers to his temple and then to the ground between them. Hale nodded. He did not say more about the 3 men on the ridge. He did not need to. Night arrived dirty and then cleaned itself. Riders watered horses by turns, not quite speaking, not quite silent. Asa hauled a pan of meat to the porch and cut slices for whoever reached the bottom step. Hands came, took, went without asking names. Sani poured kettle water over the blue clay. The room found rain again. The old woman cut 2 strips from a soaked blanket and wrapped Asa's wrists where steam had scalded. Her thumbs pressed just long enough to teach skin to remember calm. In the small hours, wind changed and brought the faraway sound of men who had counted on a wider burn, cursing the math they did not understand. No one saddled to chase them. The circle shortened to a half ring so backs could rest. The house wore the other half like a shield it had finally earned. Dawn smelled of wet ash and something like new bread, though no flour had met water yet. The world was all stubble and black lace where grass had been, except the yard, its pale oval like a coin rubbed clean. Birds tried 3 notes and settled on the one that fit. The silver-templed man walked the burn edge once, slow, boot points writing small truths in soot. At the gate, he untied the bead again and retied it with that extra turn he favored, higher still. He took a coal from last night's saved ember, ground it in his palm, and drew a short, straight mark beside the old faint ash line. Then a curve that met it and kept going. He blew the dust off his hand and looked satisfied with what the board now knew. Sani set a bundle on the porch. 2 tan strips of hide for mitts, 3 lengths of cord braided tight, a pouch of the blue clay wrapped in doeskin. She added a single hoop of fresh willow, still green, the size of a man's hat brim. Asa touched it and felt the flex that means not today, but soon I'll hold shape. He wanted to say more than thanks. He made himself useful instead. He carried buckets to the horses and did not look at their eyes like a boy who wanted to be told he had done well. He swept the step where half the county had stood and left nothing but the memory of weight. He set the willow hoop on the corner the old woman had marked and leaned 2 planks against the wall there, as if the nod he had read last night could see daylight now. The circle eased outward in an hourglass, some riders heading upstream to read where the troublemen had cut fence, some downstream to see if any ember meant to lie. The old woman touched the door jamb with her knuckles and for the first time stepped inside one pace, only long enough to turn the tin cup handle toward Ace's right hand and lay a finger on the table where Sani had once set the last bite of bread. Then she was out again, feet light, moccasins whispering a sound the floor decided to keep. The silver-templed man mounted. He looked not at Asa, but at the place in the yard where a bench might be, where shirts might learn sun, where a chicken scratch might live. He lifted his chin that fraction to ask, "Soon?" Asa answered by carrying the planks there, setting them, testing wobble, working a wedge of scrap beneath one leg until the top sat level. He didn't look back to see if the man had seen. He did not need to. They left in daylight this time, not hiding that they were guardians who had been guardians and would be again if the wind ever forgot the lesson. Hooves printed the black a while, then reached clean ground and wrote nothing anyone needed to read. Asa stood by the gate until the last feather slipped behind cottonwoods. He touched the bead once, then the coal curve on the post, then his own wrist where Sani's grass cord lay. The yard smelled like a stove after bread, though no loaf cooled on the table. He went inside and poured water, set the cup with the handle the way his right hand finds it, and sat for a breath too long because the body has to learn quiet all over again after a night like that. When he rose, he walked to the corner the old woman had cut and began the frame for whatever the nod had meant. A coop, a bench, a place to store wood. The hammer felt right. Nails went where they were asked without argument. He worked until the sun climbed high enough to make shade worth seeking, and then he sat on the new board and looked out at an oval of unburned grass in a day that had wanted to be black. He folded the willow hoop into a circle, let it spring once in his hands, and smiled the small smile people see without pointing at it. The valley had chosen to remember him differently. His job now was to give it things worth remembering. Morning wore the kind of quiet that makes a stove sound loud. Frost wrote its thin gospel on the unburned oval of yard. Asa finished the bench where the old woman had marked, set it square, and sat to test if it would hold a boy in a winter without leaning. It held. The riders returned without ceremony. Not 50 this time. Enough. The silver-templed man watched the sky once, then swung down and took from his saddle a flat, dark stone with a lip worn smooth. He set it on Asa's table and tapped it with 2 fingers. Sani brought a sack of ground meal and a twist of salt from the older woman's pouch. No words. The meaning stood by itself. An oven stone where no oven had been. They started the work as if the plan had existed all along. 2 men cut clay blocks from the creek bank. Another shaped a dome over a mound of damp sand. Sani kneaded meal and water with the heel of her hand until the dough breathed back. The old woman mixed ash into the clay, eyes half closed, counting by hinge clicks of her fingers. Asa carried what he could and did not lag. The dome took shape, small, round, true. The silver-templed man slid the flat stone inside before the arch learned to harden, and the oven forgot it had ever been a river rock. While it dried in the sun's thin warmth, the men repaired the roof where the night's heat had lifted shingles. Sani stood at the bench and twined willow into a round that became a door for a coop not yet born. She hung it on the corner nail like a promise waiting for its noun. The old woman cut a strip of soft hide and bound Asa's wrist where rope had burned him the day before. Her thumbs pressed the bandage down one breath longer than necessary, a little oath delivered in the language of tendons. Deputy Hale came alone this time. He saw the oven, the new roof line, the bead raised high, the coal mark now with a curve drawn to meet it. He nodded to the silver-templed man and asked for nothing but a look at the creek bend. He walked there, stood with his boots on fresh soot, and looked until there was nothing more to learn. On his way out, he set a short stake by the road with a square of red cloth tied at the top. County sign for search elsewhere. He didn't say it was for wolfers. He didn't have to. The oven's mouth colored from gray to pearl. Sani slid a little log inside and fed its flame, as if teaching a pup, not a fire. When the stone gave back heat instead of hoarding it, she pinched the first dough flat and set it on the lip. The smell wandered out and made the horses lift their noses. The old woman touched the brow of the domed clay and smiled a cracked smile. Asa watched the edges brown and remembered the last heel of bread, how he had halved it straight down, how Sonny had saved the final bite and pushed it back to him without asking if pride wanted it. He lifted the first loaf off the stone and held it with both hands because you do not carry new bread carelessly. They ate leaning on the porch rail. Bread tore easy, steam white in the cold. Nobody praised it. They did not need to. Sonny took a piece, broke it, handed the larger half to the older woman. Learnness lived in that small decision. After the silver-templed man drew a circle in the ash near the door with his forefinger and pressed the end of his bead string into it, so a print stayed. He stood and made a shape in the air with his hand. Open palm, then closed, then open again. The old woman took a length of rawhide from her belt and tied it high on the gate opposite the bead, not facing the lane. 2 signs now. The gate looked almost dressed. They brought out a small dun pony with a back like a shelf and eyes that did not argue. It carried a plain rope hackamore and the patience of a creek stone. Sonny placed the lead in Asa's palm. He looked at the men, then at the animal, then at the lead again, as if the rope would explain itself. The silver-templed man touched Asa's chest with 2 fingers, light as moth, then the pony's neck, then the gate. He said one word. Asa caught none of its letters but all of its meaning. Yours under our circle, inside this door. He nodded once, hard enough that the braid Sonny had tied behind his head shifted. They stayed until the oven cooled to a breath a hand could love. The old woman swept her palm across Asa's table, catching crumbs into one corner as if even waste remembered hunger. Sonny wiped the tin cup and set it handle right. The silver-templed man ran his thumb along the bench edge and found it level. When they left, they did not leave straight. They rode a slow curve up the draw, writing their shape into the dirt where the fire had tried to write its own. Late day stretched the house long. Asa led the dun to the trough and practiced the knot Sonny had tied. It held. He built the coop door on the willow frame that had waited. The willow learned to be a door. He hung it and watched it swing true. He cut short lengths of willow and made a hoop, set it above the bench, and slid the grass cord Sonny had given him through it. He tied it with his left hand on the second try. Near sundown, the first townsfolk came in that moved past the fence without looking for permission. The teacher brought a bundle of tattered primers and a piece of slate. The storekeeper's wife set down a jar of salt with a stingy face that softened when Sonny looked up and said, "Thanks," in a voice quiet enough to count. Hale's son carried a sack of nails and scattered some in the dirt because his hands were not big enough for weight yet. Asa said careful without anger and picked up what fell. He set the nails on the bench and the boy counted them with his tongue out, lips whispering numbers he would grow into. When the last of the light thought about leaving, Sonny's father, Asa, had decided that name for him, returned to the gate. He did not dismount. He watched the pony stretch its neck. He watched Asa run a hand down its shoulder. He said a sentence with both palms open and both thumbs tucked. Asa didn't know the words. He still heard them. We camped near for 3 nights. We watch because you gave a thing without asking. After, the bead will be the watching. After, come to the creek bend if you want a hunt or a song or the use of a whetstone better than horseshoes. He nodded to seal it. Asa lifted his chin the same inch and felt for the part of his chest that had learned how to answer like a man. The riders' fires dotted the long grass like a lake turned upside down. Owls took the shift no one else wanted. The dun slept standing. The new oven held its heat like a promise not to let morning start cold. Asa woke early, before Frost could choose a voice. He walked the yard, touched the bead, the rawhide, the coal curve, the bench he had built, the coop that would one day hold eggs. He knelt where the old woman had cut the earth and pressed his palm into the damp again. He said his name to the dirt in a whisper to hear if it still fit. It did, and something else sat behind it now. A second name that didn't need letters. Boy who shares, boy who has a gate, boy whose house makes useful noises. When the sun finally climbed and spread its first warm palm, the unexpected part happened. The part a valley would tell as if it were weather. Riders from 2 different bands met at Asa's fence and exchanged not boasts but tools. One laid a whetstone on the bench and took a handful of nails with a nod. Another pointed at the oven, then at the school ledger the teacher had left, then at the children who would come in spring when the snow peeled away and curiosity grew legs. Hale's red cloth fluttered with nothing to do. The storekeeper's wagon rattled out with flour and came back the same day with bolts of muslin he had priced kinder. The tinner removed his shiny hat and traded roofing sheets for bread without looking at his hands like they had betrayed him. At noon, Sani brought a small bird from the cottonwoods, already gone, never to suffer, and Asa held the knife for her while she taught him the cut that wastes nothing. She put the feather that hadn't blown away in the rawhide knot on the gate and smiled as if she had drawn a circle on the air with it. The riders slipped away on the fourth morning, not all at once. A pair at a time, then a handful, each touching the bead with 2 fingers and the coal curve with one, as if closing a book that would stay open anyway. Sani left last with the old woman. Before she swung up, she took Asa's wrist and fixed the grass cord where it had started to fray. She tightened it with a knot so smart it could have guarded a door. She held his hand 1 heartbeat longer than necessary. The old woman set a flat palm over both of theirs and pressed, not hard. Then they were on the trail, a stitch of white at Sani's shoulder, where the sun found the tiny scar left of her palm. When the grass covered their last prints, the yard did not feel empty. It felt occupied by a shape you could not sweep away. Asa went to the oven, slid the flat stone forward with a stick, and laid a new round of dough on it. He set the cup handle to his right and the knife blade facing away from the edge, because those are habits that help a house keep its good temper. He carried the first bread to the bench and tore it with both hands. He set 2 pieces aside without thinking, one for the next visitor who would not ask, one for the quiet that sometimes needed feeding. He ate his share slow, the way his mother had taught in the prairie never argued with. Wind moved across the black line where fire had stopped. The bead on the gate did not flash. It glowed the way creek water does when it decides to be stoned for a while. At the fence, a boy from town waited with a slate tucked under his arm and a question he hadn't learned how to say. Asa waved him in, not big, not shy, just open. The dun lifted its head and watched the road, not worried. Somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, a circle kept being a circle even after hooves moved away. The valley remembered in the only way that matters, by doing.